Meeting. Welcome to the October 20th version of the Metropolitan Housing Trust Fund Commission meeting. My name is Pete Westerholm. I'm glad to welcome you as chair of this commission. Want to point out something that you may have noticed. Usually we have 2 sign-in sheets, but today you get to enjoy 5 sign-in sheets. One of those, as you probably are aware, is just your general sign-in. We want everyone to have a record of your attendance, so that if there is any information from this, we can get that to you. Also, just to keep track of who is attending our meetings, so that in the event we need to get any information out, we have a record of your attendance and your contact information. Also, there's as always, a list of speakers. In a few moments, we will invite people on that list and give them up to 2 minutes to speak. And then on my left, that might be stage right. It's been a while since I had theater, but there are 3 signups for work sessions coming up. Those are each divided up into 3 different sessions, one for home ownership, one for rental, and one for rehab. Everyone is welcome to attend all of those, but some of you are probably just interested in your primary area of focus. But that is our 5 sign-up sheets for this afternoon. So with that, I'll read in a couple of other items real quick. Number 1, pursuant to the provisions of 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that the decisions of the Metropolitan Housing Trust Fund Commission may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of certiorari. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. All right, and with that, I have just a few other notes to read. We do have a limitation on our staff this afternoon that might affect some of our proceedings, but both Director Hubbard and Catherine are out this week due to some unforeseen circumstances, so they're not with us, but Mr. James Dean, also from the Housing Division, who's often here, is going to be our point person for staff today, so we appreciate you helping us out this afternoon. And so because of that, some of the discussion on items related to the policy priorities and underwriting criteria, we're going to move to our combined November-December meeting. And then the work sessions that I mentioned the sign-up sheets for earlier, those are going to take place pretty soon. Go ahead and sign up for those, and we will know more about when those are very soon. Is that going to be announced when those are in your presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Those will be announced. And our next official meeting, the combined November-December meeting, is scheduled to be on December 9th. That one is going to be a different location, as I believe I've mentioned before. That's going to be the Inglewood Library over on Gallatin Road. The address of that one is 4312 Gallatin Pike. As we get into some other items, you will see that there's there's going to be a timeline presented, and based on some more conversation, we may have some further conversations about opportunities for the commission to have work sessions to make sure that we are doing our due diligence as we prepare for round 16. So with that, I will go ahead and continue moving on to our next item, which is the approval of minutes from September 23. Is there any discussion, amendments to those minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion to approve by Anton, second by Councilor Allen. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Now we will move on to the public comment period. Just as a reminder, that is one of the sheets up there that you can sign up for. We will ask you that you keep your comments to 2 minutes. And Mr. Dean, do you have the list?
Yes, sir, I do. The first speaker wishing to speak is Rashida Pardue with the Housing Fund.
All right, Ms. Pardue.
Good afternoon, thank you. Hi, y'all. I never really have anything to say at these meetings, as you know. But I just wanted to take a moment to present an award to Berkeley Allen that the Housing Fund presents for Champion for Affordable Housing. We presented this at our meeting over the summer to Mr. Eddie Latimer as well, Eddie. But Berkeley wasn't there for us to give her, so I thought I could give it to her today, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you all for letting me do that.
Thank you, Rashida.
All right, Chair, next we have Mr. Keith Branson with Westminster Home Connections.
I had intended to speak on the potential funding for round 16, so if that's being moved, I'll wait and make my comments at that next discussion. Is that right for another meeting?
We will be going over the timeline, so if you would like to speak about it, it would carry over to the next session.
Okay, let me
need be.
go ahead then. Got my notes and we're all here. So I've been reflecting on the work session slides and discussions from this last Barnes Fund meeting. And the potential round 16 funding track slide shows owner-occupied rehab at 3% of round 16. I believe this allocation is based on what Barnes has historically funded in each category. Historically, 97% of Barnes funding has gone toward new construction and to rentals. Please base the round 16 allocations on Metro's current priorities and not on past funding patterns. The need for home repairs and preservation among long-term Nashvillians is more than 30 times what our communities are currently addressing. There are thousands of existing homes that could be preserved with our Barnes Fund support. So I urge you, I'm just going to say it, I beg you, to not limit owner-occupied rehab to 3% of round 16. We would prefer to compete in the overall pool without category caps. Otherwise, an estimated 70% of Barnes funding will go to rentals, while long-term Nashville homeowners will be restricted just to the 3%. So please raise the 3% limit significantly, or remove the category limits altogether and allow owner-occupied rehab to compete in the total pool with its own merits for funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. All right, James, who's up next?
Thank you, Chair. Next speaker is Jesse Shadler with Habitat of Greater Nashville.
There we go. Hi, I'm Jesse Shaler. I'm with Habitat of Greater Nashville. I don't come with an award, but I do have invitations to our upcoming dedication ceremony that's happening this Sunday at 2 p.m. It's up in North Nashville. The address is on these invites that I can leave here, and I believe I emailed it over to James as well, and I'm happy to have anyone get my email if they want that sent as a calendar invite. We're going to be dedicating to 10 new homeowners, so that's really exciting, and even as I say that, I think to our internal conversations that we've been saying, not to just emphasize that it's 10 new families, these are 10 new houses, because as we all know here, affordable housing is such a systematic issue that it's important to remember we're not just impacting these 10 homeowners right now, we're impacting that neighborhood with 10 new homes that are going to have these affordability restrictions and everything. And all 10 homes have been greatly benefited by the Barnes Housing Trust Fund. So thank you, I'll leave these here.
Thank you, Jesse. All right, James?
Thanks, Chair. Forgive me, the next one, I believe, is Autumn. I'm sorry.
No, it's Anton.
Anton. I'm so sorry. Anton, did you sign up to speak?
I apologize, I'm sure I signed the wrong one. I have absolutely nothing to say to you.
Thank you.
I'm just signing the one that says that I'm present.
Noted and thank you. That is the end of our list, Chair.
Thank you, James. Appreciate that. All right, next up on our agenda is the financial update and legislation. we have a September 2025 budget to actuals to review. I believe that has been, yeah, it's up on the screen. There was an explanation, I believe, provided to us, but do you want to start off with a staff explanation, then we'll just see if there's any questions from commission members?
Thanks, Chair. So I just want to note, beginning this month, the budget to actuals will look a little different. We wanted to give the commission a complete report on the cumulative financials of the Barnes Fund. Therefore, in fiscal year 2025, cumulative, you will see a total of the revenue onto the Barnes Fund and expenses charged to the Barnes Fund since its inception in 2011 through June 30th, 2025. We basically have broken it down a little more granular so that you can see from the beginning of Barnes to now. I am excited to highlight, if you look on unobligated revenue for fiscal year 2026 cumulative budget, you'll see that there's $19,282,242. That is at moment expected to be round 16 funding amount. We will confirm that by next Housing Trust Fund meeting.
All right, thank you, James. Question, Councilor Lee?
Remind me how this works. Okay, so at the end of Metro's budget cycle, there was a project that came up that had something close to $3 million allocated to it that was not able to proceed. And in theory, that money sort of came back to be available. And can you just point out where that might show up here? And does that actually make FY26 larger as a result?
I believe the 19 million is including that 3 million that was rescinded back to Barnes.
Okay, so if the Metro budget allocated 16 million, this then bumps it up to 19 million.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank
And
you.
if we find extra money, we could make this be 30 million, right?
We're open to that. Any other questions or comments from the commission? All right, this is not a voting item, so we'll move on to number 5, which is a voting item. This is a grant contract amendment with Affordable Housing Resources. It's a contract extension as well as a scope change. I'll turn it over to Mr. Dean to give us the basics, and then we might invite someone from the organization to come up and answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair. We have one grant contract amendment for consideration today. The amendment is for Affordable Housing Resources for their Round 4 contract. Staff recommends approval of the extension request and scope change due to clouded title as well as documented issues associated with tax delinquent properties. The grantee has demonstrated a good faith effort to resolve the matter and continues to actively pursue legal remedies despite significant challenges and costs. Mr. Latterman, if you'd like, we'd welcome you to come speak to the commission.
I really wouldn't like to. I just feel desperate to. This is a really complicated thing. 11 grant rounds ago, we won these lots, and this one was zoned R6, which means you could get 2 homes on it instead of 1. So that happened in the very first time we worked with y'all. I think Adrian was the executive director at the time. So we said, look, here's the deal. We got an R6. We can build 10 homes on what you gave us, not this round, but another round. But if you let us do the R6s, we had 2 of them, we can get 12 homes, and they're free. You know, you got to pay for it, but you know, the land's there, and that's the hardest thing. So they said yes. So we've been doing this all along, but it was never formalized. It was just what happened. About every other round or so, we would get these lots, and it didn't violate the contract, the Barnes Fund contract, to build more on them than not. And so that's what we've been doing. And so what they're asking us to do is to come to you all and request that we make it official by putting it in there instead of, 10 lots? 1 extra lot. So that's what we're doing. Here's the thing that we run into. This is a list of the heirs on this 50 by 150 lot. And so, but it's worth it. We really need y'all to continue giving us lots. We pay for it. We don't mind doing it because you gave us a free lot. And if we get 8,000, 10,000 into it, it's still cheaper than anything in town. So we don't mind doing this. But sometimes you just run into it, and sometimes you have this is a judge issue mostly that's causing that one. But I just wanted you to understand that's what it is. And we've got one last hurrah of an idea, and we're going to start working on that next week. That's it. I wish I wasn't here, but we are.
Thank you, Mr. Latimer. That's a substantial list that you presented to us. Are you able to tell us how much progress you've made on that list? Or, 'cause I know that we've all encountered folks in your chair telling us about some of the title issues and we know that can take time to do. But in terms of how many, the level of effort that's remaining to get to all the different people listed there, is there any information on that you can provide us?
Well, this is highly unusual. Generally, the most you run into is 8 or 10. And they all realize if they want to divide it up with their cousins, they're going to be at war with each other, so they just let it go. That's generally what happens. It's about the family at that point in time, not about the money. There's 3 people on that list that want money. And they'll probably get $12.75 if they divide it up. But it's just the way it is, and it's fine. It's just part of the development process.
Questions from Commission? Deborah?
And just to be clear, you just have 2 more units to do?
Sorry?
You have only 2 more units left?
Well,
to
it was a
finish?
one lot. We were going to do one, but we
Okay.
got a second one in there because it was an R6,
Okay.
which is an automatic. So we've got 2.
Okay.
And that's what we're asking y'all. Just increase the count.
Thank you.
And James, I believe that in the past we have done contract extension and scope changes as part of the same action.
That's correct, Chair.
And this is a good policy if that's what you want us to do. We don't mind doing it. It just was not the policy in the past, and it can be quickly adjusted whenever we get a lot that's an R6.
Any further questions? All right, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
We have a proper motion, is there a second?
A second.
And a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Thank you. I hope I'm not back next year.
All right, next we're going to move into some items for discussion. The first of these is going to be a presentation from a guest speaker, Mr. Stephen Watts, to discuss cooperative housing. I believe we're getting his deck loaded up. When you're ready, Mr. Watts, I welcome you to take the microphone.
Thank y'all very much. Just making sure this is still fine. My plan was to present for 30 minutes, take questions for 15 minutes. Does that sound good to everyone? All right, sounds good.
Is your mic on?
I have no idea.
I just want to make sure those who are listening at home can get good audio of it.
Thank you, James. Okay, so as you can see on the first slide, also, are you clicking? Cool. You'll see that I've titled this a co-op housing solution for Davidson County. A solution that sounds very aggressive, that sounds very secure, that we know that this can, but what I do not want to say is that this is a fix-all solution. What I want to say is that this addresses many of the problems that have been brought up repeatedly by Nashville citizens, by folks in Nashville government, and we want to talk about how co-op housing addresses all of those issues. So you can see that I'm presenting today on behalf of the Nashville Equitable Housing Cooperative. We've worked together on this project called Drake's Creek Cottages, which is a 60-unit project in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, still in Davidson County, which is funded through the Barnes Fund. So we have William Franklin Buchanan, CDC, which is the lead sponsor and project manager. We have Southeast Center, who I also work for, who is the co-sponsor and handles cooperative oversight. MFX Ventures, which does the financial modeling and is the owner's representative. Polk & Associates, who is the development and construction partner. And even and UHAB, which has developed over 30,000 units in New York City. Even though they're not on this slide, I just want to call it MEPR agency because they are in many ways the backbone of this project and handle a lot of the external communications. So what you'll see with cooperative housing, these are a lot of names that a lot of y'all probably know, people who work for them or people who lead these organizations. And a lot of us have put our reputations and our confidence in this model for a lot of the reasons that you're about to see. So the first thing, right, if I'm going to say it's a co-op housing solution, I'm going to have to define the problem. So I identified 4 things that we're seeing Nashvillians repeatedly need. And I decided to refer to the unified housing strategy repeatedly throughout this presentation because I believe that that's a very comprehensive look at the data and the problems that are facing Nashvillians. At some point in this presentation, I might accidentally have said united housing strategy. But it's the same thing. So the first one is rental affordability. And the goal here is to reduce rental burden. As you can see in the UHS, one of the big things here is 49% of all renters in Nashville were cost burdened. The second problem that we see that we want to address is forced resident displacement or reducing renter vulnerability. In the UHS, you see that many participants expressed a widespread fear that speaking up would result in eviction, further displacement, and continued lack of housing options. Thirdly, opportunities for residents to build equity, access to sustainable home ownership. From the UHS, you see that the county will need over 90,000 new homes in the next 10 years, and about 56% of those will need to be home ownership opportunities. Lastly, neighborhood stability, which is ensuring preservation through permanent affordability. So currently we have about 20,000 income restricted or affordable homes with deed restrictions that keep them affordable. In the next 10 years, about 30% of those affordability protections are going to expire and they're going to enter into market rate. So I'm going to start out with immediate opportunities by the end of the presentation. I'm going to loop back here, but I just want to put this on the forefront of what I'm proposing, what I think is a good option by what we've seen in the data about how co-ops succeed. The first, to reduce rental burden, prioritize conversion of market rate multifamily properties to not-for-profit community-owned properties. We can see in the data, co-ops consistently operate 20 to 25% cheaper than conventional subsidized rentals, and in some high-cost cities, which include New York, Chicago, heavily gentrified neighborhoods specifically, they're up to 50% cheaper. We're trying to solve forced resident displacement. So one of the suggestions here is to prioritize projects in which there's democratic tenant participation. Residents in high-cost cities where there are democratic tenant participation have retention rates of over 5 to 8 times than those in comparable affordable housing. They also report a whole host of other benefits like mental health outcomes, et cetera, feelings of safety. Opportunities to build equity. We want to prioritize projects with highest rates of success for historically disenfranchised buyers. So when we're talking about access to sustainable home ownership, we also have to make sure people aren't cycling out. One of the data points that isn't on this slide, but that I'll return to, is about 50% of low-income home buyers within the first 5 years are forced to are in some form of delinquency and are actually foreclosed upon. So we have to make sure that these are sustainable options. And co-op loans have the best loan performance of any of and the lowest default rates of any HUD multifamily housing program. Lastly, talking about ensuring preservation through permanent affordability, so making sure we're prioritizing projects that will not expire into unaffordability. All right, so real quick, I'm just gonna tell you who I am and where I come from. So why I do this work is really because of my grandma. So it's like a really personal for me. So I'm from New York, from the Bronx, New York, born and raised. So my grandma was the first person ever in my whole family to own a home. And that was a big deal, or to purchase a home, I shouldn't say own a home. Because what happened was, it was a subprime loan or a subprime mortgage. And even though she paid over, the home value over 4 times, at this moment, that home belongs to the bank. It was foreclosed upon and ended up going back to the bank. And so for me, when I went to college, I wanted to study specifically how this could have happened and why. Right? So I created my own major called interdisciplinary studies, and I specifically studied, my thesis, my senior thesis, was on reparations, specifically looking at race at the intersection of place and whether home ownership was enough to close the racial equity gap. And the answer I came to was no. And the reason why the answer I came to was no is because if you look at homeowners who are Black and homeowners who are or of color and homeowners who are white, they have completely different outcomes. So one of the things you can see is on this slide is that the racial wealth gap continues to increase even as home ownership rates increase among people of color. The second thing you can see is that African Americans on average have a much higher proportion of their wealth in home equity than white families tend to have. And yet that wealth gap continues to increase. And so one of the things I realized is we're not necessarily dealing with a public policy problem per se. What we're dealing with is like a structural economies problem. And so one of the things I want to say throughout this presentation, and I'll bring it back to, is that the incentives that we've been acting upon in home ownership actually tend to increase wealth and equity rather than close them, even though they are based on kind of the most basic of, American beliefs, increase home ownership, traditional home ownership, and you will close the opposite is actually tends to be true. And I'll go through some of that. I'm not just gonna make a claim without, going through it and proving it. But that's where I come to from this work. And so when I came to the Southeast Center, what I was so grateful for was to be working for an organization and a program where we're specifically talking about how can we use housing as an opportunity to actually close that gap and build the community's competency and autonomy to survive these kinds of economic structures that are designed for inequity. Next slide. So I'm gonna blow through a lot of these slides so I can get to the real meat of the data. So shared equity housing model. So there are about 190,000 units across the country, which are limited equity cooperatives. In New York, they're super common. Not maybe a 5-minute drive from me, there's a neighborhood called Co-op City. I never knew what it meant, but it was very much part of the lexicon, co-ops, but I never knew what it meant. There are community land trusts with affordable housing in over 300 urban and rural areas. There are resident-owned communities. A lot of those are mobile home communities. And there are also inclusionary housing programs. And basically, these are just ways for people to bundle together equity, and they consistently show higher outcomes. This is a map of specifically developments, not units, across the country. You can see that a lot of these are centered in really high-cost neighborhoods that had to, before everyone else was worried about affordability, about gentrification, we're already experiencing these effects. So you can see them concentrated in cities like New York and LA and Chicago. Housing cooperatives are also very common worldwide, so especially in Nordic countries, which do not have the same kind of economic systems or incentives or the same racialized history that America has, you can see that they are really common because they found that they are one of the most reliable ways to make sure that people can stay in their neighborhoods. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the cottages at Drake's Creek, because what I'm going to continuously do is loop back to cottages at Drake's Creek as a model that is happening right now in Nashville as proof of concept, and some of those lessons that we've learned. So the objective is to create affordable housing home ownership. So Drake's Creek was a market rate housing development, 60 units, that through a mixture of Barnes funding and public funding, specifically federal funding, we're able to buy off of the market and then are in the process of converting to a limited equity housing cooperative that is owned, controlled, and run by the residents. So the model looks like this. So for a housing cooperative, a community land trust owns the land itself. So a community land trust is basically a model that was invented by the 60s by Black sharecroppers who needed a way to find a way to create autonomy over land. And they found that the best way was to create this model where they're saying anything that is built on this land has to be for the sake of the community. It has to be reinvestment in the community, it has to be for the community good, and it cannot be for profit. It cannot be for individual profit, it cannot be organizational profit. So the land itself is held by the community land trust. The properties that exist on top of the land are placed into a cooperative. The cooperative is an LLC or organization. The members or the residents buy shares of the cooperative. So it's 1 share, 1 vote, 1 share, 1 unit. And so basically they have the right to occupy that unit, and they are shareholders in this cooperative that gives them their right to live there. I also already mentioned a lot of this, but they're collectively owned, they're democratic, that's what makes them a cooperative. And then instead of a rent, we call it a monthly maintenance fee or a carrying charge. And the reason why we differentiate that is because a rent is when you're paying someone who owns the property for the right to live there, and that includes whatever surcharge they are charging because that's what the market says. The carrying charge just says this is the exact cost that it costs to run this property. So the property is run at cost and not for profit. Any profit that could be generated just gets reinvested right back into the property. So the financial structure is the cooperative is responsible for income, property taxes, mortgage, all those expenses that come from operating the building. Residents pay a set share every month they pay the utilities, they pay their fair share of the co-op's expenses, they pay for personal decisions within their apartment. I think the last thing before we go into some of the meat of the data is that this property is to serve 50% AMI income and less. And I think that's really important, especially when you look at the unified housing strategy, is what you see is that the greatest need is 60% and below. And so creating more tools in our toolbox to be able to serve those populations is super important. So you can see a 1-bedroom is $1,033, a 2-bedroom is $1,239. Both of those amounts are earmarked to be less than 30% of pre-tax income and to make sure that residents aren't cost burdened. So the share price. So this is where we get to the equity question, and we'll go into it more, but this is one of the big things that people wonder. What differentiates this from normal renting? One of the big things that differentiates this from normal renting is as a shareholder, you accrue equity by being a shareholder in this LLC that also holds the land that you are living in. So the buy-in share is worth $1,000. Using Barnes money, we're able to subsidize that, so people are only paying down $500, and we're able to match $500. Every year, this accrues at 3% per year interest. So your equity increases by 3% per year every year that you live there. While that might not seem like much, by the end of, like, if you live there 40 years, and there are plenty of people who live in co-ops 40 years, my grandma on my mom, on my dad's side was one of them, that amount triples. And so you're seeing very quickly the amount that you put in increase. All right, so here we get to the meat of the data, and this is where I get really excited. So one of the things I didn't mention was, so after school, before I did this, I was a data analyst consultant. So I get really excited about data, telling stories with numbers. I'm super excited. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to go over them at the end. So looking at the rental affordability problem, we already outlined some of what that looks like, right? Rents in Davidson County are growing faster than incomes. Affordable units are declining. The rental units that used to be affordable are now becoming unaffordable. If you look on the graph on the right, specifically the orange line and the blue line, you'll see in 2016 those were very close together. What the average or median renting household could afford and the average rent were very similar. Within the last 10 years, or 9 years, I guess, according to this graph, those things are no longer have very much in common. They're getting wider and wider apart. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is supply issues, but what we're focusing on right now is we need an additional 20,000 homes that are affordable to households earning 60% AMI or below over the next 10 years. But while the county has been producing about 2,000 affordable units per year, which would seem to put us on track, we've also been losing about 2,000 affordable units per year to rent increases. So actually, we're staying right at the same amount, same level. We're not actually adding any affordable housing even as we're producing more. And that creates a really serious problem when we need to add not just more affordable housing, but more net affordable housing. So this is one of the ways that co-op housing provides a solution. So in a comparative study of 60 federally subsidized developments across the U.S., a lot of these were in high-cost cities. Operating expenses for co-ops were 24% lower than limited dividend rentals and 22% lower than nonprofit rentals. One of the things that's important to remember is operating expenses in the case of co-ops is also going to be the same as your monthly charge because these properties are run at cost. One example of that is in 2006, so in Hermitage Manor and Cooperative in Chicago, a 3-bedroom townhouse cost $555. A comparable 3-bedroom on market cost more than $1,100. So it cost half the amount. That's pretty steady in cities like Chicago, DC, New York. You'll see that initially that they cost about 25% less, 20 to 25% less. Over time, they're about 50% less. What's the reason for that? So I made these little graphs on the side to take a stab at trying to explain how these act on a different incentive level. So in traditional home ownership or renting, so if you're thinking about renting, if I'm a landlord, the only way to increase my wealth is to increase the barrier to entry, which is to increase unaffordability, which is to charge higher rates that make it harder for people to come behind me and enter into them and have access to this. In a limited equity housing co-op, the monthly charge, the barrier to entry, lowering the barrier to entry actually increases your wealth. The reason why it increases your wealth is because the monthly charge is actually one of the forms of your wealth. The lower the monthly charge, the more money that you are saving. One of the terms we've been taught to use is called pocket equity. And specifically to think of pocket equity as an immediate intervention that allows people to save money allows people to increase their incomes, allows people to spend money on things like childcare, et cetera. So it acts on a completely different set of incentives as market rate housing. So while market rate housing is designed to increase in affordability, and unaffordability over time, increase in price. The goal of limited equity housing co-ops is to decrease in price and to increase affordability. So it acts on completely different market incentives, and that's something that sets it apart from things like that you might think of like. What are those housing? Oh, like an HOA. Sorry, I was gonna ask. I was like, what are those? But that's what sets it apart from something like an HOA, where the incentive structure is completely different, where an HOA is banding together to increase prices, while limited equity housing co-ops are banding together to decrease prices. So one of the solutions here that links back to the thing that was at the beginning was we should prioritize conversions of market rate multifamily properties to not-for-profit community-owned properties. That includes co-ops, that also includes other things as well. So at Drakes Creek, what you can see is the average rent of a one-bedroom apartment in our immediate area is $1,361 per month, which is 31% higher than the $1,033 per month at Drakes Creek. That's not exactly apples to apples comparison because of size differences, but this is, but what is probably more helpful to see is from June 2021 to June 2024, apartments in the neighborhood increased by 7.25% year over year in comparison to 5% inflation over the same period. So that's a 45% increase above the inflation. So that's the nominal cost of goods, services, labor, material for this purpose of profit margin. A cooperative would just increase the same amount as inflation. So you can see that those properties are increasing a significant amount more. All right, looking at resident displacement, which is the second problem. So there was this fear that if people reported, the living conditions that they were living in, that this could result in eviction, further displacement, a continued lack of housing options. One of the things from the Unified Housing Strategy was that eviction filings in Davidson County are up nearly 45% compared to pre-pandemic averages. While Davidson County is about 27% Black, roughly half of all evictions filed in Nashville involve Black renters. One of the things you'll also see from the national data is that by far the biggest proportion of evictions are single Black women, So one of the things we see from the national data on co-ops is co-op residents in high-cost cities report higher happiness, safety, mental health outcomes, incomes, and lower incarceration rates than residents in comparable affordable housing situations. They say that they have a higher average residency, which about 5 to 8 times higher. So typical low-income rentals see turnover every 2 to 3 years. When you look at New York, that's an average of 10 years. When you look at Chicago, it's an average of 17.6 years. Studies of New York City's limited equity housing co-ops also show that after conversion to limited equity housing co-ops, buildings were in better physical condition than neighboring rental buildings run by the previous absentee landlord. Residents reported greater safety, reduced building level crime. So one of the solutions here is to prioritize projects in which there's democratic tenant participation and or ownership. Real quick, I'm just going to tell a story here about how I've seen this work at Drakes Creek. So I'm working with a family it's a 4-person household, 2 parents, 2 children. They're like 11 and 13. I can't tell them apart, but I pretend that I can. And they were in a 1-bedroom house. And one of the reasons they were in a 1-bedroom house is because they had a previous eviction on their record. Because they had a previous eviction on their record, they couldn't qualify for a lot of other places. So one of the things we were able to do is work with them. We were able to recommend them to a variety of different resources and work with them until finally we found out that this eviction happened in a way that the landlord could no longer pursue the evictions. This is one of the ways I learned that evictions stay on your record even if they're not successful. Evictions can be on your record even if they're in the wrong name. Evictions can stay on your record even if it's an illegitimate reason and the landlord is found to be at the wrong. They were living in an apartment that had sagging floors, and actually part of, in some places there were actually like holes. When I helped them move into the new 2-bedroom apartment, one of the girls, the 11-year-old or the 13-year-old, I really don't know, but she goes, "A working toilet?" And that made me so happy and so sad at the same time. And when I asked them why they didn't report these things, they were like, well, we didn't know what kind of punishment would happen. So one of the things that we see at Drakes Creek is, number one, we are not displacing anyone, even if you don't want to be part of the co-op. One of the things that does is that flips the power dynamic. Instead of you being coerced into a certain situation, you are getting the option to choose your situation and whether this is something that works for you. Oftentimes, the most often question I heard was, why is this property worth buying into? And it gave them the possibility of being the people who are inspecting versus the people who are just on the receiving end and just being completely vulnerable. Another thing I've seen is just all these capital expenditures that have been put in that were not put in under the last landlord. One of the reasons there, again, is because you have a different kind of incentive. The incentive is towards resident happiness. The incentive is for resident retention, while previously the incentive was, can we get someone who will pay more money? And it doesn't matter how much turnover there is. Can you go back one real quick? No, you're good. The last thing I want to say here is just because it's organized as a non-profit, there are just less ways for developers in a co-op to profit. So, for example, when you look at the data, AMIs are going up much faster than affordability, what people can actually afford to pay. And a lot of that is because people are coming in with super high incomes, but the people who are living here, their incomes are not going that high, which means that in traditional LIHTC housing, you might see lots of opportunities year over year to increase, even though it might still be a 50% AMI, to increase that the amount that you're actually charging. Here, there's not those same incentives because it's going to end up being resident-owned housing. So the residents will reap whatever profit and reinvest in the property versus traditional affordable housing where that's going to end up being extracted by continuing to raise the rent, even though it's nominally affordable. All right, we're on the third one, 3 of 4. We're moving through this. So home values have risen 40% since, these are all from the UHS, by the way. Home values have risen 40% since 2019, while incomes grew by only 19%. So you're seeing home prices, just like rental prices, being divorced from incomes. You're also seeing that Nashville homeowners who are low income or earning less than $50,000 a year are extremely cost burdened. So you're seeing that these kinds of traditional home ownership routes are not actually great routes. You're seeing home ownership trap people into investments that they no longer want to be a part of because it's not a good fit and they don't know how to get out of it. And they can't downsize because everything is too expensive. One of the things that the UHS says is that homeownership would be essential for closing racial wealth gaps. But one of the things is that it's not affordable or accessible because Black and Hispanic households are denied mortgages more often than white borrowers. One of the things that the UHS doesn't say, but that the data says, is that when they're accepted on these mortgages, that they are way more likely to default and foreclose. And there's this cycle that, that experts call first-time home buyer to first-time foreclosure. And we're seeing that particularly target Black and Hispanic households. So one of the things we see just really quickly on the top right chart is you see that, so this is called the Case-Shiller Home Price Index, and that just means what is happening to the same exact houses that are continually resold. So you'll see that even though these houses nominally haven't added any value, the value continues to be inflated and increased. One of the things that's really concerning is when you look at the subprime bubble that decreased, we are way, in this housing recovery bubble that we're in right now, we're way above that amount. So we're constantly seeing this, this boom and bust cycle, and each boom cycle get bigger and each bust cycle get bigger. And the only people who can win that game are the people who have enough wealth already to ride that out. So what the chart on the bottom shows is what happened during the Great Recession, which is where all gains in Black home ownership since 1965 were erased just in the Great Recession. And so what you'll see in the data is Black home ownership isn't any greater since the 1960s, specifically because these boom and bust cycles are not about sustainable home ownership. So this idea of home ownership that we're talking about being beneficial to people, it's the data doesn't always bear that out. What you see on the other end, though, is with co-op loans, is that co-op loans have the best loan performance and lowest default rates of any HUD multifamily housing program. You see delinquency rates near zero, almost infinitesimal. In comparison to, so the FHA delinquency rate, of 10.6% in Q4 2024. And FHA rates are typically what they serve a much higher share of Black and Hispanic mortgage owners or people who are loaned to than any other program. Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll hit here is, in contrast to the long tenure you see in co-op housing, one study found nearly half of low-income homeowners exit home ownership within 5 years. So even if they're able to enter home ownership, they're not typically able to sustain it because that's not what the structure of the economy is set up for. So one of the things you see at Drake's Creek is, so obviously I can't talk about retention or anything like that, but what I can talk about is who we've been able to allow to be part of the project that typically wouldn't qualify for a traditional mortgage. We can have inclusive screening policies on things like criminal record, status, vouchers, credit score, evictions, housing-related debt, general delinquent debt, limited rental home ownership history. Part of that is just because the co-op loans are because they're blanket mortgage loans and because they're bundled together. If one person, for example, can't pay their monthly carrying charge, the property doesn't go under. Unlike a traditional single-family house where if someone can't pay for a month, they're at risk for going under almost immediately. We have initial buy-in share of $1,000 compared to an average down payment of $38,000 for the median house. If you take the national average of 9% down payment to hold standard. And again, you're seeing pocket equity as a racial wealth gap intervention. Again, so here you increase wealth by increasing access. Because the more access you have, the more people you have who can pay their shares. You want more people in the apartments. The lower the amount of people you have in the apartments, the higher the vacancy rates, the more you actually have to cover and the more you have to pay. And so access is positively increased with wealth. Traditional home ownership, access and wealth are actually negatively related. Because what you want to do in home ownership is you want to decrease the supply as much as possible. So you don't want new things to be built. You don't want people to have access. And I'm not saying that people don't want it. I'm saying this is how the economy is structured, because the economy was structured in a specific way for the accumulation of wealth and control over certain kinds of assets versus actually producing value. All right, this is the last one, and then we're going to go into just like a recap, and then I'll turn it over to y'all for questions. So neighborhood stability. So Nashville has about 20,000 income restricted affordable homes today, but a lot of those are going to expire over the next 10 years. A lot of these new buildings that were being able to be constructed and built were because of ARPA dollars. Those ARPA dollars are going to expire. The naturally occurring affordable housing that we do have aren't because of affordability restrictions. We're seeing them filter upwards into more expensive housing. And so even with the level of housing production in Nashville that we've had, it hasn't been able to keep up with demand. And a lot of that's because new construction has largely been constrained to the most costly kinds of housing to build. A lot of it has been on places that are zoned for commercial property, which have much higher rates. The chart on the right just shows that this is a global trend. This is not just a Nashville trend. It's just harder to build housing. And a lot of that is because people understand that the more housing there is, the more their wealth decreases. And a lot of wealth is dependent on not building housing. So one of the things we see as a solutions, and so this is kind of like a smoking gun, kind of, or at least I hope it is. So the Mitchell Lama Housing Program is something in New York that it was passed by legislation in 1955. It created 66,000 subsidized rental apartments and 69,000 co-op apartments in New York City from 1955 to 1981. One of the problems with this was there were not affordability or permanent affordability protections built in, and after about 20 years, owners were able to buy out to take those projects to market. But as of this decade, 50% of the rentals created by the program that were affordable housing, non-co-op affordable housing, only 50% of them are still considered affordable, as opposed to 93% of projects that were created as cooperatives. So even without specific affordability protections built in place, 93% of projects were able to last as affordable housing just because they were cooperatives versus other forms of affordable housing. The last thing I'll say here is when we're talking about subsidy retention, we're really talking about what gets reinvested into the community versus what gets extracted and taken by individuals. And this is just to say that housing is a pretty stable, in an economy that ran differently, housing would be a depreciating asset. So when you drive a car off of, the lot, it immediately depreciates because you put mileage on it. Housing, even if you immediately over time, it appreciates. But that's not because the housing itself is more or is worth more. It's because the community and usually the government is investing more around it, right? There are better streets, there are better roads, there are better amenities, there's better internet, et cetera, et cetera. And so the question becomes, who reaps the benefit of that community investment? Is it going to be is it going to be the community, or is it going to be someone who happened to purchase a home in the right neighborhood, even though they didn't even necessarily build up that house? It's just accrued gains based on public investment. And so one of the solutions here that I want to offer is to prioritize projects that will not expire into unaffordability through whatever means possible, whether that's first right of refusal, community ownership, limited equity cooperatives, et cetera. One of the ways we see this in Drake's Creek is I'm going through with the residents now all of the co-op documents. We have legal controls on resale, owner occupancy, affordability. We have the regulatory agreement with Barnes. We're also bound by our charter, bylaws, occupancy agreement, and our ground lease with a community land trust that mandate a project run for not for profit and for the community's lasting and permanent benefit. And so one of the things that you see by combining the co-op model with a limited community land trust model is you're seeing all of these permanent affordability mechanisms that are built in. This is a graph that was in the UHS that I saw Angie present on at the OHS conference. And one of the things I just want to do is just call our current ecosystem analysis into question. The kind of assumed model that we've been moving off of is that home ownership, market rate home ownership is the best, it's the most stable for everyone. And then a market rate rental housing is next best because it's market rate. And then affordable home ownership and other kinds of subsidized things are below that. But a lot of the data doesn't necessarily bear that out. A lot of the data, especially if you're going to compare affordable home ownership to rental housing, a lot of these things on the chart is, affordable home ownership equity is higher, that you have a lower eviction rates, that you have lower debt, you have higher savings. So we kind of have these assumed ecosystem analysis based on what we've been taught to believe. Basically, because home ownership is considered like traditional home ownership is the American dream, it's just so deeply baked into the American consciousness. But a lot of the data talks about alternatives, especially for low-income people that have significantly higher outcomes. And so those are one of the things I just want to call into question and talk about our biases that we come in with. Lastly, this is everything that we've talked about. I'm not going to go over it, but these are some of the funding opportunities: reducing renter burden by prioritizing conversions, reducing renter vulnerability by prioritizing projects with democratic tenant participation, access to sustainable home ownership, especially with highest rates of success for low income and historically marginalized or excluded buyers, neighborhood stability, so ensuring preservation through permanent affordability, so no expirations into unaffordability, or at least not for a very long time, longer than the traditional 30 years. And one of the things is, so those are ways to build those models into the rubric, things that co-ops do really well. But beyond what co-ops do really well, even though that's my bias, is just things that Nashvillians need. But then also, if depending on how you want to divvy up the buckets, is to consider giving permanently affordable or co-op housing its own funding bucket to make sure that these kinds of projects are funded and funded well. Lastly, continue the opportunity for continuing education opportunities that can consider an annual orientation on the value of co-ops to the affordable housing ecosystem. This presentation I pulled together in about 5 days, and I could go on about this data forever. There's so many data points that I left out. And then consider ensuring that at least one commissioner has expertise with community-led, and what I really should have said is community-owned affordable housing projects. That's for y'all. I didn't know what the format of this was going to be, so.
That's all right. Thank you, Mr. Watt. Appreciate that presentation. I guess at this point, we'll first turn things over to commissioners for questions. Let me start with one, and I'll turn it over to Anna. So in Nashville, this is a newer concept for us, and I think that one of the challenges that Nashville may face compared to some more mature markets where this is more established is just getting the buy-in both politically and publicly. Could you address in some of the cities that have had more experience with this, how they've been able to achieve that and find more support and more opportunities to create these types of opportunities?
Yeah, so with the Mitchell-Lama program specifically in New York, so that was statewide legislation. So a lot of it comes top down, but there was also the opportunity, because this legislation was specifically a response to realizing that there were slumlords that were not taking care of their buildings. This happened in the 50s, this happened in the 70s in the 80s with Bronx's burning, and people realized the slumlords are not going to take care of their buildings. Why not let residents take care of their buildings? What's the worst that can happen, right? It just reached such a point where they were like, why not? And what they ended up bumbling into is there are way better outcomes when the people who are most invested have the most levels of control. In Nashville, it's been very difficult. So when I talk to residents specifically, a lot of them, at first they didn't understand it. But one of the things that is really cool about the program is it requires pre-sales. So what that means is to secure the funding from HUD, you first have to you have to have the residents sign on and agree to become a co-op. And it requires 75% of the residents or the units who are living on the property. And that's what we were able to do. And so even though community education is a challenge, it's not insurmountable because people understand, that this kind of ownership, this opportunity for equity is something that's worth it.
Thank you, Anton.
So say there's a building like condo built in 2009 falling apart in the Gulch. Like what kind of subsidy would you need from the Barnes Fund to be able to turn it into cooperative housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's similar to the funding that we previously received. So what we previously received was, I believe, $7 million in order to purchase a property that was market rate, but that was a 60-unit property. Obviously, the funding depends on the size of the property. But yes, it would have to be enough to secure being able to get it off of market rate.
So is there any other type of cooperative housing we could do with more efficient funding, because we have a smaller funding pool next year and a lot of projects that we need to figure out how to fund?
No, I understand, which is why I clapped earlier when you said maybe you'll find 30 million. I would say that there are smaller projects that can be pursued. So, for example, a condo project, I would say it's just all about the units. It can be scaled in different ways. There's also ways where, even though I'm here to represent limited equity housing cooperatives, there are resident-owned projects that are not cooperatives as well because they're not democratic. There's kinds of different ways to fund them, to structure them, and I think we just need to use all the tools in their toolboxes. And if some of them are more efficient than others, then I think they should definitely be pursued, which is why I tried to leave the suggestions as broad as possible to make sure that different kinds of strategies can, get us there.
Okay, so my question is, okay, you see how society's going right now, and let's say 20% of the co-op,
Yeah.
right, is having hard times, they need
Yeah.
to pay for other things. Would that burden, if all these people, 20% of the building, there was an issue where they couldn't pay, would that burden go on to the other homeowners, quote unquote, or how would that work? And I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll, so we don't.
So what I'll say is we have good data on this because of the Great Recession, where there were multiple studies conducted on what is the outcome of co-ops specifically in among low income households where, people can't really share that much of a burden, versus market rate rentals and also other forms of affordable housing. And what they found was that delinquency, foreclosure rates, but also eviction rates inside of co-ops were so much smaller. I'm looking for the exact amount, but I might not be able to find it. But yeah, it was 5 to 8 times lower than in other affordable housing rentals. Part of it is just because of how the loan is structured, because of how the loan is structured, it just allows for a greater amount to be put into reserves, and it also means that the co-op is not at risk. For example, even if a large portion of its members are having trouble of having to say, "Hey, we need to just replace you," there's a lot more ways to figure it out. And so that's what they found was that typically instead of evicting people, what they were able to do is find people resources or dip into reserves in order to, keep them there.
Okay, and then you were talking about pocket equity,
Yeah.
right? Conceptually, I get it, right? But as we saw with the refund checks and, with the COVID checks, just because people have the cash doesn't mean that they're saving it, right?
Of course.
So without freely moving equity, right, how do we say this is actually ownership where I have equity? Okay, and then just to follow up on that, let's say I get in year 88, right? I'm old and wrinkly, right? And who owns the land when that 99 years is up, right? What is the progress, right? Real estate is a long game, right? It's not a short-term play, right? So you say at year 88, when it gets to year 99, right? Who owns that land? Can they just sell it from under the people? Do you really own anything? Do you get shares when you, like, how does that whole situation work out?
I'm going to start with the first half, and I might need you to repeat the second half. So on the pocket equity, I just want to say, I think that this is a significant amount, right? Pocket equity is the same as if you're getting paid more, right? If you get a raise at work and you're not saving it, that doesn't mean you're not making more, and that does not mean that your quality of life does not increase. Same thing when your costs decrease. Whether or not you are saving it, you are spending in a way that you believe increases your quality of life. So I think that is a valuable form of equity, whether or not you see it in financial ways or whether you see it in quality of living. And then also, of course, you have also the share prices, which is the more traditional form of equity. I think the other thing I would say is, I think we would all love this kind of exponential equity that we've kind of become accustomed with as the traditional home ownership. But the question is, who has access to it, right? And so I think the philosophy here is it's better for like a large amount of people to have access to some form of equity than a small amount of people to have access to a huge amount of equity, because we know who gets left out.
So do you get to, like, could you take out equity? Like, could you take out money from it, like, you know, the way you could do with a traditional home?
No, at least that's not my understanding. I can get back to you with a firm answer, but that's not my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
CLT question, Stephen. She asked about CLT. Can you repeat the CLT question?
Yeah, so, forgive me, okay? We're at year 88, right? Or let's say 89, 90. Okay, after the 99 years is up. What happens then? Because it's in a trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who owns it? Like, after this, and let's say the people, they want to sell it, right? Do all these people, are they all forced to move? Like, how does it work? Is this a potential for generational wealth, right? Like, to pass on to next generations, right? If I wanted to give it to my grandchildren, would this be an opportunity in the same way a homeowner could? Or are you just like, out of luck, you have some equity while you're alive, and, you know, after that, it's gone?
Yeah, there's a couple different questions there, so I'll do my best to answer them. Yes, this is an opportunity for generational wealth. This is something that can be passed down to heirs, right? So if someone, so I'll give you an example. My grandma on my dad's side was able to pass it down to my cousin, right? So it absolutely gets passed down as long as you have someone in the family who qualifies. If no one in the family qualifies, you still get the payout, right? So you still get the payout after all of that of living there. In terms of the community land trust, so the community land trust is held in, it's a structure that says that whatever is built here has to serve the community in perpetuity. Right, so the community land trust is in perpetuity. The cooperative itself is leasing the land from, or the right to use the land from the land trust for the 99 years. That doesn't mean that the cooperative ceases to exist after 99 years. The cooperative is an LLC. So what the cooperative would have to do is renegotiate with the community land trust. But the cooperative exists unless its members decide to dissolve it.
Maybe my question is, who's the beneficiary of the land trust? That's maybe my.
Who is the beneficiary of the land trust?
Yes, like, does it go back to the city? Like, who's truly owning it is my question.
Okay, great question. I understand. So the community land trust right now is owned, so the board of the Community Land Trust, which is the better answer, the board of the Community Land Trust is William Franklin Buchanan CDC, and then also the Southeast Center for Cooperative Development, which is why they are, the sponsor and the co-sponsor of the project. So the Community Land Trust is basically, I think the best way to think of it is not in terms of beneficiary. The beneficiaries is the community, right? It's land that is set aside for permanent development and redevelopment for the sake of the community. There is no profit that is being accrued from the land itself. So I think it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. Instead of thinking about the land as something that the purpose is to extract from it, right? Or because, you're in the right place at the right time. It's to continue to build up investments and infrastructure that will benefit everyone in the community and to treat it as a community investment. Does that help?
So to look at on the other end, if there's an apartment complex, for example, that has gone into disrepair, is that a possibility? I mean, then the Community Land Trust or the shareholder, someone's taking on the financial burden of repairs, which if this doesn't happen, we know what does happen is that someone comes in and paints it and doubles the rent. So obviously, it would be better to have, the renters become the owners. But how does the financial piece of doing significant repairs intertwine between the land trust and the shareholders?
Yeah, for sure. So the way I would look at it, I would kind of divorce it from maybe the Community Land Trust for this. I would just think about it as the shareholders, so the people who are getting the benefit of the property and also getting the equity from the property are also the people who live in the property. And it's in their best interest to keep it as high quality as possible. That's why the data continuously shows that that co-op housing has better benefits and property development and also, maintenance and safety, et cetera, than other forms of affordable housing. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, though.
I'm, just looking at numbers, if there's it's going to cost $2 million to fix up this apartment complex that 100 people live in, then does everybody have to shell out
I
the
understand what you're
thousands of dollars
saying.
it'll take, for their share to do that maintenance?
So one of the things I'll say is that obviously anything is possible. The data shows that it's not probable because of the financing, because of the incentive structure. Mm-hmm. But yes, the burden would fall on the people who live there in order to fix it. But there are significant reserves that are set aside for capital expenditures. For example, just in that case.
Gotcha. So if you can get in on the front end of it, you could keep up with it.
Yeah, even if you got it in on the back end, the finances are set up specifically to address. So the history, right, was this model was inheriting properties from slumlords and having to deal with significant capital expenditures. So the model is already geared towards exactly that kind of scenario.
And then from a funding perspective, are there banks in Nashville that have figured this out and are comfortable doing it, or is it just the housing fund?
That is very much an Andy Zhu question.
That's an Andy Zhu question. Okay, that's my last question.
Okay, so when we were looking at the last funding round, I did see that there were things like pet fees and those kind of things. Like, how do you, what are those going toward? Like, if this is my home and I own it, why am I paying pet fees and stuff like that? Yeah, that was the question, yeah.
Yeah. So your monthly carrying charge goes to exactly what it costs to run the building. So for example, something like a pet fee is the same as in any property where you're saying it costs more to maintain a property where that has more wear and tear because of a pet or something like that, right? So it's just trying to take into account what does it cost to run this property, where is harm most likely to occur, and can we offset this in small ways that are acceptable to the general community? And again, those kinds of things are, because it's democratically owned and controlled, those kinds of things are voted on by the community, agreed upon by the community, and if the community decides they don't like it or it's not fair, or that there's a better way to redistribute risk, it can be redistributed.
Okay, so following up with that question, let's say renovations.
Okay.
Because it is fixed, right? And like the same thing with pets, there could be more damage. Do you have the freeway to do internal renovations for your own unit? Or would that have to be something that's voted upon, or it's just not allowed?
What kind of renovations?
So, let's say they want to add a kitchenette and knock down a wall or something. Any home improvement that they would see as a fit. They wanted to add a stairs, I don't know.
Yeah.
Any kind of
I
improvement.
understand.
Would these things have to be voted upon where you're just not allowed to do it? Or has that ever happened?
And it's one of those things where it just depends, right? So there are things that are, where it's like you have control of your unit, right? You're paying for the right to have your unit. And then there are things that are especially could compromise the structurality of the building or that are outward facing, external facing, that would have to be voted on by members, specifically in terms of not necessarily if it could happen, but creating those rules about what can happen and what are procedures to figure that out. Okay. Yep.
And Mr. Watts, sort of a follow-up to that. So a lot of the charters that would govern these types of co-ops, to what extent are they flexible? I mean, in some cases, it sounds like they might be a creation of state law and have to abide by certain requirements of whatever the statutory elements exist at state law. But even in a municipal situation where you may have a situation where, especially working with local leadership, a charter in one part of town might look a little bit different from a charter in another part of town. Could you describe just in broad terms how much flexibility there is in charters to reflect the particular desires of a certain part of town or a certain type of development?
Yeah, what I would say is probably most of the charters will look the same, but things like occupancy agreements, things like bylaws. So the charter is, what is the co-op? Those are going to look pretty similar. The model is pretty tried and true. But in terms of the bylaws, how do we choose to operate? In terms of the occupancy agreement, how do we choose to live here? What is allowed? Those kinds of things are super flexible. And then also financing, obviously, will change depending on what kind of area in town you are. And for example, places where there is no Barnes Fund and have to raise private equity or have to, rely more heavily on federal loans than we do. So those kinds of things would probably differ from place to place.
Appreciate that. Other questions? I'll ask one more. Maybe it's the last. In your comments, you, I believe, were advocating for a separate pot of funding to go towards co-op housing. As everyone here knows, we have currently 3 main buckets we've been looking at. Can you tell us a bit more why we should consider co-op as a separate bucket versus something that exists within another bucket?
Yeah, one thing I'll say is I think co-op housing, some of the things I propose could fit within just the rubrics that are already existing. But in terms of creating its own bucket, it's really because it has its own set of incentive structures, right? So it has higher rent than it has higher equity than rentals, but lower equity than home ownership. It's more affordable on the front end than home ownership and rentals. It's just this kind of unique liminal space, in-between space, that I think that if y'all were struggling to think, how does this compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges? How a limited equity housing cooperative might stack up against other affordable homeownership options or traditional homeownership rentals. I think it could be, I think it's a way to make sure that the kinds of investments in these projects and programs that need to happen, especially if there is a lack of clarity on how these might fit into a general rubric.
I appreciate that. All right, I think we've reached the end of the questions from the commission. Mr. Watt, we appreciate your presentation.
For sure. And my information's all up there, so if you need more questions, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, before we move on to the next items on the agenda, I just want to remind, for anyone who may have come in since we began, there are an additional 3 sign-up sheets at the front. These sign-up sheets relate to some work sessions we'll be having soon. Stay tuned on that in just a few minutes. But those are going to be focused on our 3 buckets of ownership, rental, and rehab. And so if you did not get a chance to sign up for one of those, please do. Also, if you did not get a chance to sign up in your general attendance, we ask that you please make your way up to the front to sign up on that sheet as well. Now, back to our agenda. This was our item for discussion. Our next item up is the round 16 timeline, and I'll turn things over to Mr. Dean to walk us through that.
Thank you, Chair. So as you guys can see on the projector and on your screens, this is the round 16 timeline that staff is recommending. We did take into account that round 15 had a lot of applicants, and it constricted the process a little bit, so we have added in a little bit more time.
All right, thank you very much. On our agenda, the next 2 issues were going to be the round 16 policy priorities, as well as a conversation around underwriting criteria. However, without barn staff here, I'm not sure that it makes as much sense for us to go through that. As much as I think we want to be talking about these things, having seen the timeline that was presented to us, we have a lot of things to have conversations about. I'm also, looking at what we presented as the next meeting, which is our December 9th. That is, 5-6 weeks? I'm terrible at math these days. But it's a ways away. And then if we're looking at going back into January, meeting to be at a place where we're making determinations on the policy for round 16, there's not a lot of time. And what I'm contemplating for other commissioners is to request that staff send us out a poll to see if there's an opportunity that we could have some other work session that would, we'd get notice, we'd ask and invite people to come so we can have just a little more time to discuss. Especially, and I'm not trying to get ahead of ourselves, but the workshops that are coming up in about a week or 2 on our 3 main program areas. There's also, and I'll let you respond to this a bit, and there's some conversations going on with staff around some policy recommendations, and maybe we just pause there and let you respond to that.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, the workshops that folks can sign up for are to get some lived experience from the grantees that are participating in these project types. It will assist with developing policy. The barn staff is also working with the Housing Division policy team this round to really bolster our policy goals. So I invite everyone who has participated in a Barnes round, and even if you haven't, that would like to give lived experiences, things that make you ache about the process, so that staff can bring that back to the commission and, again, really bolster round 16 policy.
Thanks for that. And just trying to think out loud a little bit. So the December 9th meeting, at that point, we will be having a conversation about the policy priorities of round 16 as well as the underwriting criteria. And I would argue those are extremely important for us to have a robust conversation about. But I'm wondering, would it make sense to try to figure out, and I'm trying to think through a potential request from staff. So if the conversations are happening November 5th, 10th, and 14th, Obviously, holiday season is extremely difficult, but would it be possible, do you think, to try to have some sort of work session with commissioners invited? And I guess my question is, after those work sessions and the policy folks having a chance to then review those and try to figure out what would make sense to include in the conversation. Basically, I'm just trying to figure out how do we get as much information on our minds in advance as the December 9th work session as possible. And I would pause to see if commissioners have any reaction to that idea.
I mean, I agree completely. Just the policy priorities and underwriting criteria could be the most important thing we do.
Any other thoughts?
I agree as well. I think I think it will be important when we get together in December to not be seeing those things for the first time. And it looks like the week of November 17 or the week of November 24 are both before Thanksgiving. So the week of 24 is kind of heading into the Thanksgiving holidays. But I mean, I'd be, there's National League of Cities is from the 19th on. But the 17, 18, 20, 24, 25 days seem good.
And because it'd be a work session, we wouldn't necessarily have to have a quorum. And obviously we'd still notice it. But with what I think is support from the commission, James, I'll send an email to staff and see if there's an opportunity for us to have a conversation somewhere. Whether it's here or somewhere, we'll try to provide notice to everyone, just to have a little more opportunities to converse about those.
Understood. And following, so it's looking like, of course, staff will reach out with a poll to determine best date, but it's looking like maybe 17th through the 25th. We try to have a follow-up work session with what come out of the work sessions with the grantees.
I appreciate that.
We'll send that out.
Thank you. All right. I think we've done enough announcements on those stakeholder work sessions, unless there's anything else that we need to add to that. Are those going to be located, those are virtual?
Yes, sir, they will be virtual.
Okay. All right. So occasionally we do have additional public comments. First, I'll ask that if there's any additional comments from the staff or commission members.
If there is anybody watching that was not able to attend today, you can also reach out to the Barnes Fund email if you would like to be added to the roster for the work sessions. That's barnesfund@nashville.gov, or you can also just reach out directly to me.
All right, thank you. All right, any other comments? As far as public comments, we do sometimes offer an additional public comment period, but with today's conversation mostly on the presentation of Mr. Watts, unless Andy wants to come up and tell us anything.
Sure. Well, I can answer Berkeley's question, I guess. Hey, this is Andy Zhu. Ooh, got the echo. Is it because we're on? Two mics down's on. This one's on. Yeah. All right, let me sit down over here. This is Andy Zhu with MFX Ventures. I'll answer Berkeley's question about how much is this available or known, who banks locally, who finance this. The answer is no, there's none. I mean, when we tried to work on the first project, I talked to a lot of banks, and it's just such a new concept. I mean, you saw on the original map, there's barely any in the entire Southeast, not to mention just Tennessee, right? We're maybe the second. We thought we were the first one in Tennessee. The only other one we found was one from 1970. So we're definitely at least the second one in Tennessee, first one in Nashville area. Couldn't find any in Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi. There's some in Atlanta and a couple in Florida. So just all the regional banks here don't really have any expertise in this. So one of the considerations that as you all are evaluating this and priorities and supporting projects that have come through, the two things that I think would be valuable is presentations and education of lenders and making sure people understand what's going on here. And the second is Peter, you asked about kind of charters in different areas. One of the big things here that I think would be a really valuable policy advocacy standpoint, and we're going to try to lobby the state on this, is to recognize these as actual home ownership, because they are owner-occupied residential units. Most other places in the country that have a property tax framework for cooperatives consider them to be residential owner-occupied units. In the state of Tennessee, we do not, because of an adverse ruling about 10 years ago about timeshares. So we got a ruling that these were closer to timeshares, which they're not. You have to be a permanent resident, you have to live there full-time or intend to. Can't rent them out, you cannot make a profit off of them. So in terms of policy advocacy, I'll just throw that out there as something that it would help to have government, commission support from to support that. How we are funding these is, Stephen mentioned the HUD loans. That's the national product. That funds most of these cooperatives. The hard part is getting the cooperative set up. So we've been using bridge loans. One was from the National Cooperative Bank for this previous project. We're looking to use the Catalyst Fund, hopefully to bridge to that HUD product to be the final takeout. But for 99% of these projects around the country, it's going to be a HUD loan that takes them out. And so the question is to educate the local community is, if there is a HUD loan to come take you out, Mr. Banker, how do we educate you to know that this HUD loan is coming? What are the requirements for that? And can we set up that pipeline?
Thanks, Andy. All right. Any other questions, comments from the commission? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to adjourn at 3:37. Thank you, everyone.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.